The pharmaceutical industry is a complex and fascinating field. It takes countless of people to bring a high quality product to the market. In the Qualitalks podcast, I bring to you leaders, experts and innovators who will share their experiences and explain to us how they do it. Welcome to the Qualitalks podcast. I'm Jan Kugel, your host, and my guest today is Paul Palmer. He's a pharmaceutical advisor with about 30 years of experience in the field. He has one of the most impressive CVs I ever seen. I literally had to scroll down for a few minutes. He is a qualified person and a business advisor. Today we're going to talk with him about the differences between the quality assurance and the quality control and the different philosophies behind it. And we'll talk about the importance of establishing a quality assurance philosophy throughout the whole organization. We'll also talk about the importance of performing monthly trend analysis and how it would benefit your establishment in the long run. Hi Paul, it's great to have you here on the show. You talk a lot in LinkedIn about the philosophy of QA, QC, and you mentioned that some organizations don't get the philosophy right, or they don't understand the difference between QA and QC philosophy. Can you elaborate a bit about that?
Hi, Jan. It's good to be here, and thank you for inviting me onto your show. It's good to meet you on LinkedIn. I find it's a really good business platform. The issue that I have with people with quality control and quality assurance, I find a lot of companies think about the department and the role of the department, not the function or the culture as quality control and quality assurance. Now, the big difference being the quality control department can perform some quality assurance functions. So the quality control aspects can be difficult for people to grasp. So I use a slightly simplified model. I call the quality control the activities that happen at the end of the process. So the testing you do for final release. And quality assurance, the actions that you do before the process. So, for example, if you want to install a new machine, you do your change control. That's quality assurance. If you're doing your validation, you're still on quality assurance. Quality control doesn't actually get involved until you finish your validation and you're actually manufacturing your product. So the quality control is the testing then that you carry out at the end of the manufacturing process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that sounds right. So usually when I talk about quality control, I speak about the release analysis, the raw material testing, and less of documentation oversight.
That's right. So in quality control, you're doing the checks that you make sure that it's actually as you expected it to be at the end. Under a quality assurance culture, you're more looking at how the control plan can be used throughout the process to ensure at the end of the manufacturing process, you're going to have a product that you know before you even get to test it is going to meet the specification. So a good example is aseptic manufacturing. So with aseptic manufacturing, you rely on the controls you have in place more than you rely on the finished tests, because you can do a sterility test at the end of the manufacturing process, but you're only looking at a small number of samples relative to the size of the batch. So if you want to be confident that your product's actually safe to be administered to a patient, then you want to make sure that all the controls in place up to that point have been acceptable, that they've been done properly, that they've been documented properly, and that the process that you've used is as you prescribed it in the control plan.
Yeah, I see it exactly like that. So would you say that the problem that you're talking about, the mix-up, the misunderstanding, is a problem of rather small companies rather than big companies?
Unfortunately not. I see the similar problems in large companies. So for example, when you come to look at trend analysis, now trend analysis is preempting a problem. And unfortunately, I find even larger companies look at trend analysis and say, oh, well, it's in spec, so it's okay. But they fail to review the fact that they've had the last 4 or 5 test results over whether it's weeks or months with an increase in value, and they're just about to approach the action limit.
So would you say that the quality assurance department doesn't do enough there? Maybe they don't have enough oversight, or maybe those companies don't even have a separate quality assurance unit?
They have the unit, they just don't understand the differentiation. So they just look at, yes, it meets the final spec, and release it based on that, or accept the results based on that. Unfortunately, it's often the quality assurance department that's doing the review of the trend and just accepting it based on it meets the finished product spec. And I find that I go out and I audit, and rather than just auditing and identifying issues with a company, I'm out there training them as well at the same time. Because for me, if they're my supplier, then it's better for me if they understand how to make sure the product's going to be right, because otherwise there's a risk that I'm going to get out of stock just as much as they are. Because if I'm relying on their product coming to me, I want them to be confident in their manufacturing process so that they're not going to get to the end and not be able to release it to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I see it, it still seems to be like some oversight from the quality assurance that their operations are not set good enough, or maybe they don't look at the trends analysis. They maybe look more at out of spec situations, but they don't look enough at out of trend situations. Is this the case?
Yeah. It is to some extent. That was just an example, to be honest. If you were educating the company, you wouldn't restrict it to the quality assurance team. You need to be confident that your validation team are working in the appropriate way, setting the right control measures, making sure that they're doing the right tests. You also need to be confident that your engineering team are doing the preventative maintenance on time, and they understand why, if they don't, that they have to notify somebody. You need to look at the purchasing team to make sure that they're not looking to reduce costs and impact the product. An example I can give is the purchasing teams for a company I used to work for. They were looking at methyl cellulose as a filler in the tablets. And the global team were looking at reducing the cost of it, because they purchased a lot across the whole of the company around the world. Now, they said basically, oh, it's the same product, it's got the same finished product spec, let's just put it into the product and we'll get this cost saving. But I was in charge of the change control procedure at the time, fortunately, and I insisted that the purchasing manager did a test and tried to manufacture it. And what they found was that the tablets actually fell apart within 3 months. And what we found when we tested it was the particle size, which wasn't listed in the spec. The profile was different. So there was a significant increase in smaller particles in the material than the previous product. And as a result, the actual tablets didn't hold together.
So what should have done to avoid such situation?
Well, what they did do was they did a trial run. So it's about making sure that your process works before you use it in a full-scale manufacturing run. And because I was insisting, they actually did what they should have done. So rather than being quality control and manufacturing a full-size batch, they did the insurance aspects to verify that it was going to work before they put it into the full manufacturing process, at my site at least, not necessarily around the rest of the world. And they knew that it wasn't going to work, so it didn't go into full production. They just did a small sample size batch. So we saved a lot of money.
Yeah, in effect, sometimes when you really invest more in quality, sometimes it seems that you invest more time and more money when you invest in quality and risk analysis. In the end, you actually save more money because you don't have to waste much product on failed batches.
That's right. If you bear in mind that the API is always the most expensive component, trying to save a few pounds here and there on one of the excipients and then wasting a full batch, if we'd actually gone ahead just losing one batch, would have taken us probably the next 5 years to recoup our losses.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. So let me ask you that: what should companies do to change their mindset? What steps should they take?
So there's a principle called total quality management. And basically what you do, you map your business process first. You map it out all the way from the purchase of raw materials all the way through to your finished product manufacture. And you look at the critical control points throughout that process. Now, if you don't understand your process, you're going to have to do a bit of work to identify your critical control points. But usually you'll find that the actual manufacturing process itself, the people running it, will know if they tweak this particular setting that it goes out of range, or if they follow the exact process that they've been trained in, they have to do a slight amendment to get it to go out and pass. And it's sometimes hard to get them to admit that they do something slightly different because, of course, they're then not doing it according to the way that they've been trained and the way it's documented. So you have to go through from the start to the finish and do trials slightly outside the standard range. Now you're looking at between 5 and 10%, depending on the robustness of the process. So you want to look at the temperatures slightly higher and slightly lower than what you would normally manufacture at. You want to look at the humidity slightly higher, slightly lower. You want to look at your actual materials right at the top of the spec, right at the bottom of the spec. And if you find that at the top of the spec, you have a problem with your finished product or you have your problem with your manufacturing process, then you can increase the robustness of your process by insisting that you get a spec that works better. And by looking at all the different parameters, especially identifying the critical parameters within your process and putting controls in place within the process. So you might want to do CPK, control charts. And by looking at the control charts and seeing how many times you need to do your adjustments, when you need to do your adjustments, what impact it has, you then have a better understanding of how your process works and what impacts your finished product. Now, it does seem like a lot of work. And to be honest, if you've already got a product that you're manufacturing and you've been doing it for a number of years, it's better to actually restrict it to the data that you've already got and use the data you've already got, especially the failures. So if you look at the failure modes for your product, use your deviations or your non-conformances and your complaints. You can then identify the areas first to target. So, for example, if you're doing soft gel capsules, look first at temperature and humidity, because the soft gel is impacted by temperature and humidity. If you're looking at hard gel capsules, then look at your seal integrity and your humidity, because they become brittle if their humidity goes out. If you're looking at tablets, look at your actual look at your production process for the tablets itself, but the compression machine. Sorry, I couldn't think of the compression. If you look at the compression machine and whether you've got a deduster in place, how your actual machine is compressing, what controls you've got, because you can get now machines that have got the compression strength included, so it actually measures every single tablet as it's manufactured. But then, of course, you need to look back at your flow rates, make sure you've got your materials coming down at the right way, look at your mixing process, make sure that's right. But it depends where you've got your problems. So what I always say is focus on where your problem areas are first, and then expand it to the rest of the process. And put into place controls so that you know when you're within your design space, and if there's something that's really critical, then you make sure you double check it. So one of the basic principles of quality control, of quality assurance, is actually it's more GMP really, to be honest. If there's something that's critical to your manufacturing process and your product, you check it once, and you get somebody independent to do a second check before you go on. And if you have a critical parameter, and because it's an existing product and there's no way you can engineer it out, then do the extra check, and then you eliminate the risk of throwing the product away at the end of the manufacturing run.
Yeah. So you talked about several things. So you talked about stress tests. So basically harder specifications in a more difficult environment to make sure that it really sticks and it works. And the other one is look better at your deviations, your trends to improve your process.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of the time, the area to focus on first is the deviations that say retraining, because it's very rare that retraining will ever fix a problem. It's quite often one of the bigger bars if you Pareto analysis, your deviations. And then, of course, any others that you can relate to the finished product failures.
Yeah. So basically, you should look at those information once a year, more.
I mean, I would be inclined to review them monthly, actually. But I do it in a slightly different way. So if you do them monthly and you've hardly got any data, then you're not really going to show much of a trend. So I look at the full year's data, but on a monthly basis.
Okay, it makes sense.
So if you've got 12 months here, when you move forward a month, your 12 month is still there.
Yeah.
And your 12 months and 12 months. And then you can see if you've got trends up and down. Because if you only look at a really small time slot, then it's unlikely that you're going to be able to view the trends.
Okay. So, and what would be the next step after you recognize the trends? Would you do an additional validation? So you would start with the change control and risk analysis to see how it would impact it, or what would be the next steps here?
Usually root cause analysis. So if you've got something that's so if it's a gradual increase, you might find it's a maintenance issue. If you've got a step change, so you've got something that goes up and then continues at a higher level, then you usually find that there's something to do with materials. Or you might have a change control that's took place at that particular point, and you know that you've changed something.
Okay, so it's a change in material, maybe change in equipment that caused the difference.
And the root cause analysis usually has to be a broader ranging action. You can't do it just based on, well, that result's out, so it must be this. You have to get a team together, look at what the potential causes are, look at FMEA, fishbone diagram, whichever tool is appropriate. Unfortunately, there's plenty of different tools available, and the nature of the problem really dictates which tool you can use. If it's something really basic, you use the 5 whys. Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why? Until you get to the root cause. If you've got something that could be a good, you have no idea what's causing it, then you have to go every direction and don't rush to say this is the cause. Because sometimes you find that you assume it's one reason that's causing the problem, and you find 3 batches down the line that it fails again, and you fixed the problem, the initial one that you thought it was. You have to make sure you do a thorough root cause analysis. Now, if that's something that you've manufactured months ago, then it's hard to do. And that's why it's important that you're doing your trend analysis on a monthly basis, not on an annual basis. If I'm looking at a problem that occurred in April and it's now February because I'm trying to do my periodic quality review, then it's too late. It's just too late to do any further analysis, to do more in-depth review, and you might find you're already getting product that's going to fail its stability, and you're going to have to recall it.
Yeah. Would you say that sometimes there are some conflicts of interests during the root cause analysis, where people start looking at the way to fix the problem before they identify it, because they may assume it's too difficult or too expensive?
I think often people don't want to spend a lot of time on it, and the conflict of interest, because you've got the resource allocated. But unfortunately, if you do the job properly, you do it once. If you do the job half-hearted, then the likelihood is you're going to be doing it again next month.
Yeah, that's what we want actually to avoid.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You don't want to get back together every month doing the
do
same
it
problem.
once and then do it good and forget about it and move to the next one. Exactly.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
how how long should it take for companies to move to this new philosophy?
So there's different aspects to it, and unfortunately, it depends on the current situation of the company. So, for example, if you have a company that's got 1,500 deviations a year, they're going to have to look at the ones that are causing the biggest issues first to do their root cause analysis. They'll find it just overloading and unlikely that they'll ever actually succeed in the root cause analysis for everything with that level of stress on the system. So you look first, you do your trends, you look potentially for Pareto analysis if you know you've got a lot of one particular thing. I tend to try to take out the training ones first, simply because it's an easy answer, and unfortunately quite overused in many companies. Isolated. I once looked at a deviation, and it was during an audit. It was abroad, and they said, "Oh, isolated incident. We've retrained the operator." So I looked back in the deviation log, and I saw another one with the same name. I thought, let's look at that, and it said it's like 5-6 weeks earlier, isolated incident, retrain the operator. I thought, see if we've got any more. And throughout the last 6 months, they'd had 5 isolated incidents of the same issue, and they'd retrain the operator every time. And
So
3 of those retrainings
it's always the human
were the
error.
same operator. Exactly. But it's an easy answer.
It's easy. It's just close the deviation, make a kappa, train him, and it goes away.
Yep.
But unfortunately, it doesn't, right?
No, exactly. That's right. So then it comes to somebody doing the trend analysis to say, well, you've got this one, this one, this one, this one. What are you doing about it? But if you're under 1,500, so you're looking at about 120 per month deviations, it's hard to spot those. So you need a system in place as part of your deviation procedure that looks back and says, is it really an isolated incident? Has it happened before and again and again and again and again? And that's quite hard to do unless you go to an electronic system. So you're asking about what's the first step. Well, for me, the first step for a lot of companies is actually to go to an EQMS, an electronic quality management system. They document their procedures, of course. That's the easy part. The harder part is the data. Now, you bring your data into your digital package in such a form that you know what sort of trend analysis you're going to be doing. But you also need to have the flexibility of the base data so that you can present it in different ways. So, for example, a LIMS system connected to your EQMS is going to bring all of your data in, the raw data as well as the test results. So if you find that you've got a problem with your related substances and you only had it at a certain time point, then you might want to dig back into your raw data to see, well, is it the data or is it the way that it's being manipulated that's causing the problem? And always look, if there's anything, always be suspicious of something that's happened when you've changed. So, for example, when you go from a manual capture to electronic capture, well, it's unlikely that that's a trend. It's more likely that it's the change in the way that you're capturing the information. Similarly, with nitrosamine that's being identified as a significant issue at the moment, the actual data, to me, isn't likely to be different. It's the way that we're looking at it that's changed. When you do a validation of a test method, so 10 years ago, you were probably going to, your limit of detection likely was higher. So you can't say that that validation that you did 10 years ago is invalid. It's just not up to current standards. And what people fail to do is consider that things move on. And they say, oh yeah, we validated it when we first did the production of the product in the first time. But then somebody comes back and says, well, we've got this new related substance. Well, where's that come from? Well, we changed our HPLC to UPLC. And because we've got increased a lower limit of detection, we can now see something that we couldn't see before. That doesn't mean your original validation wasn't valid at the time, but what it means is now you can see things that you couldn't. And then then what people fail to then do is consider wider implications. So they've identified a root cause. We found this new related substance, and we know that it's because we've changed our methodology. So then think, well, have we changed our methodology somewhere else? And have we done just an equivalence study, or have we done a full validation? And if you've just done equivalence, then you don't look at as much data. If you do a full validation when you change the equipment, then you do the job, what I call, properly. We do it with a number of batches, which can be hard when you've got huge batches of excipients, for example. So you go back to your manufacturer and say, well, I really need several batches of this to be able to complete my validation. And usually they're helpful. Not always, but usually. If you can't, then you introduce some variability yourself. For me, it's never a single approach. Quality assurance is about all the planned and systematic activities that you put into your process. And I know that's similar to the ISO standard, but I don't tend to use that one because I find people understand what you do before and what you do after. It's a much easier way, especially if you want to bring the philosophy to the whole company. And that really is the only way it's going to work. Because if people don't understand why they're doing it, well, how are they going to highlight the issues that can fix the problem?
So the company should not rely only on the quality assurance department, rather they should train all the employees to think alike and to work more harmonically with the quality assurance department, willingly looking at the data, willingly reporting more information to the quality assurance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then because they've got a good understanding of why they're doing it, then they're not going to skip something. Then they're going to be making sure that they do write something down when it's slightly different to normal. And when you're doing that, when you do introduce it to them, you have to make sure that it's clear to them and to their supervisors that there's no blame. If they identify something that needs to be resolved to reduce the risk to the process, they're not blamed for it. They're commended for it because it actually makes the consistency of the product and the manufacturing, and of course at the end of the day the bottom line, the profit, is going to be higher.
Yeah. So I think it's one of the problems right now that there are many companies where the people feel blame when there are deviations. You should be rewarded when you're writing a deviation, that you're reporting a deviation,
especially when it results in a significant improvement to the process.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I read a while the book of Ray Dalio. Do you know him? Ray Dalio, he's a billionaire in the USA. He owns the biggest hedge fund in the world. And recently he released a book where he talks about his success. He came to his success from nothing. He had no money, and he started his business in a two-room apartment. And then he became a billionaire managing billions of dollars. He implements in his company, it's a finance company, and still he implements the risk analysis and the deviation reports, and he says you are rewarded for telling about mistakes, and if you hide the mistakes, you will be fired. If you hide the mistakes, I give an example. One of the big executives there forgot to move the money for a big client, and the client lost hundreds of times, maybe millions of dollars, which then the Bridgewater, the company of Ray Dalio's, had to pay them from their pockets. But still, but this guy, the executive, he came and he told, okay, that was my mistakes. And he said, okay, I could fire him, but he was truthful. Yes, he came to me and he understood his failure, and he didn't hide it, because if he hid it, it could have gone like 2 years, 3 years before they found out about it, and the damage would be much bigger. So I think it's a great approach to say you see a mistake, you see a problem, you must report it, you will be rewarded. And the consequences for not reporting should be much harsher.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up Ray, because he's in a finance area. I actually implemented the quality assurance philosophy in a credit card personalization center back in 2001, I think it was. They didn't have a quality system. Their company had just purchased the personalization center from the bank, but they decided that they wanted to bring in other business. So they brought in phone card personalization, and they brought in KPI, which is PKI, security systems. And the point is, I helped them to put their quality management system in place, not because they had an issue with the banking services which they'd brought initially, but the add-on services, the phone card personalization. Because it's okay if you get two of the same credit cards going to the same place, but if you get two phone cards, they don't go to the same person. So if they get issued with the same data on them, one person gets charged for both cards. And they had a significant problem when they brought me in, that they were getting repeat cards. And it was as a result of the rework process, but they didn't know that at the time. So I looked at the way that they were doing the manufacturing. Unfortunately, it was a 24/7 company, so I had to do night shifts as well. And I started putting procedures in place. And the control procedures initially were specifications, of course. I looked at where they were getting their failures, started documenting them as deviations. I found that one of the most significant deviations that they were having to deal with all the time and rework all the time and have delays to customer service was one of the specifications. And we went back to the manufacturer, and there was a problem with the way that the card was being manufactured. They were using a go, no-go gauge, and they'd machined it perfect, just to the right size, but then they put a screw through it in the wrong place, and it no longer worked.
Okay, so it was they just had to do a really good root cause analysis.
Well, they didn't do the root cause analysis. They sent me instead.
And you did it for them.
And I did the root cause analysis of the whole plant.
That's what they had to do. So they worked.
That's a good point, actually, because you could class that as a root cause analysis. I had to go through the whole of the manufacturing process.
Okay, yeah, because they probably don't have the same documentation, and the process not well documented. So you really need to dive in and really learn about the process to find it.
I did have to go into a lot of detail throughout the whole thing. Yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you can really take the controls from the pharmaceutical industry, which are one of the best from all the industries, one of the harshest. Maybe also, I think also in the car manufacturing, I think they also have some really tough controls. But I guess each industry can benefit from such controls, from risk analysis and root cause analysis and so on to improve their processes.
It's a common philosophy: systemize the business. If you want to be able to sell a business, for example, whatever size, if you have it reliant on one person because they know the answer, you can't sell it. If you put all the systems, processes in place, and anybody can run it, which is quality assurance, then you can sell the business.
Mm-hmm. So this finance company, they worked under some ISO 9001. Did they have some quality system in place?
Nothing at all.
But after you left, so it's interesting.
After I left, they had a full QMS in place.
Yeah,
yes.
But it's interesting because I think it's really important. Many companies they hire consultants, and when those consultants leave, they take all the knowledge, and nobody really cares to learn from them to implement. They just want quick fixes, and that's it. So it shouldn't be like this, right?
It shouldn't be like that. And you reminded me of another company I
Yeah, tell
worked
us.
with from your comment. So it was a service company. So they're providing media, films. They're licensing it in, licensing it out, and they were struggling with their finances. And I went into them as a business consultant, but what I actually applied to the business was the pharmaceutical knowledge, because I mapped their business process for them. And by mapping the business process and having consistency in their approach, within a year, they were able to more than double their
Oh,
revenue.
that's amazing.
And I know the numbers. It was 350 to 839, because I actually followed up with them a year later
Okay.
to see if it was actually a benefit. And they said, yeah, we're still using the procedures that they put in
Yeah.
place. The process map and the
No, that's
procedures.
great. That's great, because many just concentrate on marketing, on branding, marketing, which usually sells the product, increase their revenues. But I guess, as you say, many companies can benefit from having really good procedures.
They can,
Yeah.
because the issue is, one person might think you're supposed to do it one way, another person think they might do it another way, and unless you've actually got it written down, you're going to get diversity in the approach.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you do a lot of consulting for many different kind of businesses.
I'll consult for anybody, to be honest. I call it helping, and they're helping me out with adding some value to me as well. But I find it's interesting. Interesting to get different views, different perspectives, and that's one of the reasons I really like auditing, because every company you go to, when you audit, you see something new. Okay, you might see some issues, but you'll always find something that you can learn as well.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess it's really true when you audit inside the pharmaceutical industry. But I guess when you go to completely different industries, like the finance, you can learn tremendous things which you can bring from industry to industry and implement there.
That's right. And one of the things that I learned when I was auditing over in the credit card manufacturing was, I'd been told many times by the pharma companies, by the IT team, oh no, you can't take pictures at that rate to actually verify that your product's been manufactured properly. And there I was looking at a machine that was taking pictures at 10 times the speed of the production processes in the pharmaceutical industry. It's possible, but it's whether you want to put the effort in and the money in to actually do it.
Many companies, small companies, may think, okay, we cannot afford it, but they also should think about how much manpower it saves them in the long run, right?
Yeah. Yep. I know a company in Ireland is already using a vision-based system to actually verify that they're coding everything properly in the pharma industry.
Would you say that also small companies should really consider investing more money in digitalization? Would it benefit them?
I always say that they should do what's appropriate for their business.
Okay.
So
how would they know?
So for example, do a financial analysis. What's if they let's see. So do something simple, a simple packaging operation. They're bringing the product in, they're repackaging the product, contract manufacturing, and they bring it in and they're digitizing the image of the product as it comes in. They're digitizing the batch codes, and now the information, it goes straight onto the records electronically. The system that they're putting it onto has visualization, and it recognizes the correct code on the product and the correct product name, the correct strength. Goes to the next stage, and you're this is already forming part of your batch record. So you go to the next stage, you've already applied a barcode, so you identify it, you scan it, and you scan your product, and it does the optical recognition again, so you can't make a mistake. You go into the actual assembly area, you've got your optical recognition, and you're generating your record. Now, with that level of control and something kicking it backwards if it is wrong, so it gets rejected if it doesn't recognize it, as the QP at the end of the line, I'm going to have the confidence to be able to release something in minutes instead of hours. So they have to work out whether that actual time being able to ship to market is of benefit to them. So if they're taking it through the full process and they're confident that all the data they're capturing is accurate and it can never get to the end and be wrong, then that's the ultimate assurance, because you get to the end and there's no way it's not going to get released. And you can do the same thing with a full manufacturing process. If they look back and over the last year they've rejected 10 batches, and they've either not been able to identify the root cause, or they know the root cause is a missing material, for example. If they put it into their process and that would save them 10 million, as an example, probably more if it's a full batch, a number of full batches, then is it worth spending 1 million to implement the controls? And what we need to be doing is talking to the CFOs and actually show them what difference it can make to their business. Because if they're going to add 20% to their bottom line, they're going to jump at it and do it straight away. But the concern then is, who do they get to do it?
Yeah.
And are they going to do it properly?
Yeah. So they need some consultants that come.
Exactly. And that's where I would go in and do the oversight for them. Because when you're setting a protocol, what's the most critical part of the protocol? Acceptance criteria on a protocol. So when you're doing a test, the acceptance criteria is the most critical part of any protocol. And if I'm reviewing a document, if it's a protocol and I've got the report and they've got some excuse at the end, I think, right, okay, I shouldn't call it an excuse, but it's usually an explanation of why it didn't go right. Then you go back to the beginning and you see what they set as their acceptance criteria. And if their acceptance criteria was quite woolly, it's going to be better than the previous one. Well, that's not an acceptance criteria. It's going to meet this specific range for all these test criteria, and then we're going to do it outside the range and make sure this actually happens as well. Then that's acceptance criteria. And for me, that's the first point that you need to look on in any contractor that's coming to help you to improve your assurance of your product.
Yeah. What would be your suggestions? How should a company choose the right consultant for them?
Do a small trial. Choose a single area that can be isolated from the rest, and do a trial that runs in parallel to routine manufacture. So when you're doing your tests, when you're doing your improvements, you run the trials that are not going to impact the finished output. And if you find that you get the improvements that you're expecting, you then give them the wider scope. It is hard. You want somebody that's got experience. You want somebody that's done the validations before themselves, probably. You want somebody that understands the overview of the company, which in the UK tends to be the QP, because they've got no choice. They're expected to have the overview.
Yeah, because they
have to sign on the bottom line to say that it's all okay. So they've got to get the overview. In a distribution, it's like in a distribution center, it's likely to be the RP. But for me, the most important part is the knowledge. What have they done before? How did they get trained to get to the level that they're at? For example, myself, I did a master's in quality management. Now, on its own, that wouldn't give me the confidence. But then applying that master's in quality management for the last 26 years would. I wouldn't bring a graduate in to implement a quality assurance program because they don't understand the business. There's a lot more to consulting than just having somebody that says they
it's
can
all
do
about hands-on.
It's hands-on. It's doing the work. It's starting from the basics. I didn't go in as a graduate. I went straight from school and started at the basics in the factory, understanding what's going on. And people are surprised when I, as a QP, go and walk into the factory. Say, what's he doing here? Why is he spying on us? And it's not spying.
Yeah,
it's
because you understand what's going on there, actually.
Exactly. So, I for example, I've validated sterilizers myself personally. I've validated test methods. I've validated seal integrity methods. I've done it myself. and I've had the oversight of people that have done it for me. And that breadth of knowledge you can then apply to the process of improvement. And I personally would look for people with the depth of knowledge and education, but not in something that's irrelevant.
Yeah. So they need really someone who understands the quality management from the start of the process till the end of the process, to really help them find the weak points. Yeah, so it's not that if you have a problem with auditing, you bring an auditing expert, or you have a problem in production, you need someone with a really good oversight, someone who knows how the process should be from the material income, right? And until the shipment, from the start till the end.
And once you've got your consultant, then you need the team that represents each department within the business.
Yeah, so because they, as we said, they need to learn and they need to understand. So when the consultant leaves in the year,
exactly,
they can keep going.
That reminds me of the first time I ever did it, because we had a consultant and I was part of the team back in 1990 something.
Okay.
A few years ago.
Okay, and what happened then? So the consultant came and you were the one who needed to learn from him.
Well, I think the team was about 30 of us, the initial team. So we did a pilot, and we had the consultants helping us to look at the actual business process. It was quite a, I wouldn't say it was a simple process, but it wasn't as complex as the way that the manufacturing processes are now. And we had a consultant in that was helping us identify the design space for the process that we were manufacturing. And I was the quality representative. We had an engineering representative. We had I think 5 or 6 operators because we wanted to be across shifts. And we had management representatives in there, and the outcome was we identified that the process just didn't work the way that it had been designed. So we were looking to put a control strategy in place, so CPK. One of the requirements to be able to do that is you have to let the process run for a period of time. Unfortunately, this particular process ran for 5 items and it went out of spec. And we had to we realized that the operators were the ones that were keeping it in spec all the time because they were the ones that had the knowledge of the process. And we ended up getting an engineering firm in to actually improve the robustness of the process to get some consistency from it. And the consistency meant we had less waste. It meant we eliminated the rejects. The rejects that we were getting were for high or low assays. And it was because the process was so far out of control. It was up, down, up, down, up, down. All the time they were making constant adjustments. And the operators in there had been doing it for 10, 20 years, but we wanted to launch a new product. And we couldn't launch a new product that we couldn't validate. Because we knew that the testing regime that we would have to do for a new product that we couldn't validate would be huge. And what's the point in launching a new product if you're not going to make any money? So they actually redesigned the process. They got some consistency in the fill volume and manufactured it. And it went to market.
And successfully.
Successfully. Okay, it took a while. It took about 18 months to get from concept to completion.
But it's not that long. In the product life cycle, it's okay.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm doing this web series where I talk about FDA warning letters that companies receive. Some products that are considered cosmetics in Europe are considered pharmaceutical products in the USA. For example, toothpaste, some creams, etc. And there are quite a lot of warning letters that went out this year for companies that manufacture such products in Europe, also in Asia, and they are not close to being GMP. They don't validate processes, they do things on the go. For example, one of the companies said, okay, they manufacture toothpaste and they say the process cannot be validated. It's too complicated. So they just change controls while production. And yeah, and my thought was, okay, if people can manufacture a protein from a living cell in a bioreactor, and they can validate that, how cannot difficult
I'm sure
is
they can make toothpaste.
Yeah, so the question is here, they're always adjusting, they're throwing away material. So my thought is, if you do a validation, invest a bit of time, a bit of money, it will save you a lot of time and money in the future. Isn't it right?
That's true, but also you need to consider the person using the product.
Yeah.
If they've got that level of inconsistency in the product, is it actually doing the job?
Yeah.
So if it's toothpaste, you want people's teeth to be nice and clean and the enamel intact and your product to be improving them.
Yeah.
So I would suggest they do look at the finances to actually improve the processes, but at the same time, think of the actual quality of the product. Is it doing what they're selling it to do?
There's a question. The question is, for example, toothpaste is a pharmaceutical product in the USA because it contains fluoride, and it may have adverse effect in the long run. For example, tooth decay and so on. So it's not like a medicine that doesn't work. So immediately, okay, it doesn't work. It may take years until you understand, okay, I'm using the same toothpaste for years. My teeth have decayed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many toothpastes in the UK are actually licensed products as well.
Oh, okay.
But they're OTC products.
Over the counter, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Is there something that I didn't ask you and you would like to tell about this QA/QC philosophy? Or did we cover everything?
I think the key to summarize it is don't rush. Look at where you are now and move in stages forward. Make sure people understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you'll get the support. Because if you don't, you'll get resistance and the project's likely to fail. So I would start with the failure data within the quality team and talk to the accounts team to identify the cost of failure. And usually you'll find that the cost of failure is what can be used to justify the investment.
Yeah. And would you say that it usually pays off?
I haven't seen one that didn't ever.
Yeah. So I think that's the key phrase.
Yes.
Right? It always pays off.
It always pays
so
off.
You didn't have an experience where you said a company has invested so much money and it didn't bring results in the end. Never. Yeah. So I think we have here a conclusion. Always invest in QA philosophy, and you always look deeper into your processes, into the quality parameters and so on, and not only the deviation, but always look at trends.
And plan to succeed.
Yeah, have a plan, and if you don't have the people with experience, get someone from outside that can help you with it.
That's right.
Because it pays off in the end.
It does.
Yeah, great. Okay, Paul, thank you very much for coming to the podcast and telling about your points of view about this, about your experiences. It was very interesting for me, and I'm sure that will be also interesting for the community.
Thank you for inviting me, Jan. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Was happy to do so. So have a nice evening.
You too.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Qualitalks podcast. If you did, share it with your friends and make sure to subscribe for more. Stay compliant and see you in the next one.